Hello everyone, this is MTR from MTR Fab, and today we're gonna do some brake work to my Honda 250R. This is the ATC three-wheeled model. So the calipers are very similar on the back of TRX 250R, a twin pot setup, or a twin piston caliper, however you want to say it. But it should be regularly maintained. As you can see, I've got like I don't know if it's fork oil. I think the forks are leaking because it's been sitting more so than they're like worn out. They may have not. They're weird fork seals. They're called leak-proof seals, and they're kind of float in the position that they're in. They don't have like a hard ring backer like a standard fork seal. So I kind of want to ride it and see if it just kind of clears up and maybe top off the fork oil, because I know everything in there is relatively new, comparably speaking. So it shouldn't be all worn out yet, is what I'm saying. So this has been spewing stuff all over the place. I want to get this cleaned up, and when I do that, we're going to talk about a couple things. So the service manual will tell you to jack this thing up. As you can see, it's up off the ground. I can do whatever I want with it. You can also tell that the front wheel's been loosened. I don't believe you have enough room to get this caliper off the brake rotor unless you remove the four wheel nuts, which the service manual has a procedure for this. I just briefly looked at it before I did this because it's been a while since I've done it. But we're going to just push the wheel back. As you can see, the wheel won't come off because I left the nuts on. I don't want to have to keep track of them. I've just left them backed off the last few threads everywhere, which should be enough to get us through what we need to do over here. So we want to take these two bolts out, and we're going to have to get at these pins that are behind these caps. So if you see there's some flat blade, I've got a screwdriver right here. We're gonna turn that out, and this is like one of those ratcheting screwdrivers, so forgive me, one-handed. Okay, I don't want to drop this. I know how small they are, but you see how tiny they are? But I think if you look at it, there's copper coat on it. I either put Never Seize or copper clad or something on it to prevent it from seizing in there. So while we're taking these out, we'll talk about that. Every one of these that you find that's been sitting forever, these are likely seized right in there and they won't come out like this. So if you haven't done a brake job for a while, you're in for a treat because you're going to be drilling everything out. Hopefully you can save it, but you can see some Never Seize on the end of that one. So, I mean, it's wobbed right in there. Because I've done the brakes on these, I know what I dealt with to get new brake parts. 12mm for the bolts, and this is, I believe, a 5mm Allen key. I can't really see, it's kind of worn off. So we're going to not turn these all the way out. I just broke them free on the machine. Especially if you haven't done these for a while, you're going to want to try to get this stuff loose while it's being held on the forks. So I wouldn't really loosen any of this stuff until you've got the caps out and these pins sliding. A lot of times they'll just get corroded in, like I described to you. Either the caps will be seized in, or you'll get the caps off, and in there the pin will have been in there for 20 years, and they never come out. So these are kind of exotic. They're twin piston calipers. They're special for their day, and even by today's standards, a lot of ATVs just use single piston calipers, especially out back. This 250R has, you know, twin piston calipers up front and out rear. So in there's a couple seals. I mean, yeah, after 25 years you got to rebuild them. But these were built 10 years ago, so I think I should be able to just take the thing apart, slide it around, take the pads out, see what they're at, if they're all soaked or not. So I want to start this off by saying, boy was I wrong. So those pads were absolutely spanked. The rotor seems fine. I'll show you the pads here in a sec, but I'm going to talk to you about this. So the pistons were almost all the way out, as you can see, and you need to clean all the way around that piston before I push it back in. Don't just, you know, if there's a bunch of crud on it like this caliper had, don't just push them back in. You're going to be doing yourself more harm. I know that the seals were replaced in this, so it just needs to be cleaned up, and then I can push those back. When you push them back, you got to push them both back at the same time. Can't try to push one, and if you push one in, the other one will pop out and it'll be a mess. So push them both in at the same time, clean up around there before you send them home. I'm gonna have to get new pads because after all that, they weren't gone, but they were about as close as you can get. So this is another example of why you take these things apart once in a while. There isn't much left. They're soaked. They're completely unusable. The other thing that I'll point out is these were well lubed. I've cleaned them all up now. But you can see some pin wear or pad wear where they've settled. I don't have a new set of hardware right now. Not gonna replace these because I just don't have any. I just know that the next time I do these I gotta get pins. There are plenty of aftermarket options for pins too. You don't have to buy OEM Honda ones. The other thing I'll say is I should have put a little never seize or something on these bolts. These are the ones that hold the bracket to the fork, and they were dry and they were hard to get off, so wet. The rubbers are still okay. I think these are aftermarket. They feel like it. I think I remember when I did a brake kit, this was like a, you know, a Dennis Kirk rebuild or something. I don't know. So you can see this bracket was pretty nasty. Even after I wiped the pins, I want to show you the corrosion that's happening on those pins. It can be kind of scraped off at this point, but any longer and this bracket likely wouldn't have come off, and then you get into beating on a caliper. And so I'm glad I took this apart. One, because it needs brake pads anyway, but two, because they tend to get stuck together if you don't take them apart once in a while. So never seize everything when you put it back together. I had to scrape the corrosion off that pin, and occasionally these brackets will get stuck in like I described before, but what you see is what happens. The end of it ends up corroding in. It ends up growing to the point where it's bigger than the hole it originally went into, and because it's a steel pin and aluminum, it does all kinds of weird stuff. Just keep in mind, use limited heat and go slow, because the corrosion happens quick. This has been sitting for a few years. These brakes can be seized in. This is an example. This pin, these pins you can purchase, and they're showing their wear, but I'm going to reuse them. But this wouldn't come out of this bracket if I didn't do something about it today. So you can see I've got it started. The pin's coming out. That collar would be flush. But I put the nut on there, and then I hit it with a body hammer in my hand, so I'm not pounding this thing in a vise or anything unless I need to. I think that was a lifetime, and now it was bound up because it's been sitting. But this pin is slowly coming out. Instead of trying to keep driving it out, I'm actually going to squirt some penetrating oil inside there, tap it back in, and then tap it back out, and exercise it for a minute, and then it'll be easier to twist this thing out without grabbing it with pliers and marring this. It does have some flats, but unfortunately they're not 180 degrees out from each other. It's weird. But I've seen this on brake pins before. If you know why they're shaped this way, I assume it's to prevent corrosion from locking them, which obviously it still doesn't do so well, but it's better than I think if the pin was solid, but that's my speculation. I don't really know. If you know, comment. You can see the shoulder on that pin, how it's nice and dry, because it's behind this nut, so it never gets anything. So I would actually put a dollop of anti-seize. You know, you're going to have it on you all over anyway. But I'm going to clean out this hole. I did just keep tapping it back and forth after I put some light oil. I'm going to take this pin out for the same reason. It's hard to replace if you destroy the bracket, so I'm going to pop that loose and never seize that pin too. The Honda ATC250r uses the same brake pads front and rear. So, you know, realistically this is one change out, you know, so there really isn't as much as it seems. However, we're going to use one of these sets. I noticed there's 2 grooves in this one groove in this one, 3 grooves in this one. These look like they're heat treated or something. It's weird. I don't know. They're copper clad, which I like. They look alright. I don't know. These ones look really clean. Nice machining on them. They got 3 grooves. I think these are the ones I'm going to run. Just because I like the groove. But here's the deal. Like I said, I burn through pads quick. So, you know, I stock them. Whenever I see them cheap, I ended up buying them. I think these are the ones I'm going to run. So I'm going to throw these in. I'm going to never seize all the hardware. The slides, I'm going to use silicone grease. A product called Sil Glide. It's a brake lubricant, and it's specifically designed for brake lubricant. So it's better than anti-seize to use on the slides. It's really what you should be using, or what we should be using. So it's what I'm going to use. Yeah, I'm going to start putting this thing back together. So we're going to talk about brake fluid in the master cylinder here. These screws are notorious for getting stripped and or seized in the aluminum body. So this master is actually off, I think, a 450R or a Honda 400EX. I don't even remember. But don't even bother trying to track down a good ATC one, as all the sight glasses on the ATCs are all cracked by now. So this way you get a nice looking reservoir. It's done, and it works very well. This is also a Russell aftermarket braided brake line. Since I did this restoration, I did notice a long time ago that there was somebody making repro front brake lines for these that are amazing. I may at some point when I replace this one, but it's still good for another run. Russell makes nice stuff, but I did want to share with you how I'm going to push this caliper in. So see how I've got 2 clamps rigged up to the 2 pistons, and now I'm just going to slowly tighten these screws in unison, and that's going to push those calipers back in. You could do this with 1 clamp and a plate of steel, but it is kind of awkward, it's seeing as there's a tab of metal in between the 2. So these big clamps work really well for this. I've done this way. But keep in mind, you got to clean all that stuff, the schmutz from around the pistons. Keep them nice and clean. So there's another thing while I'm looking at them. See how they're black plastic pistons right in there? That means they've been replaced. The originals were some sort of nickel or chrome barrel, I don't know. So I know that this one I rebuilt, and it has new seals and stuff. Well, 10-year-old seals in it now. But so I'm going to push these back in, and then we'll get to putting it back together. So I actually realized while I was doing this that I haven't used these clamps before, because these are really nice. They've got the twist handles. You just stick something in there and twist them around. I used to do this with the Allen key version, but this works pretty good. So they're all the way in. How do I know? Because I can't turn them anymore by hand. That's far enough. And they move freely in. If you try to push your pistons back in and there, you can't do this with like relative ease. There's something else going on. You got to take them out. Trying to blow these out with compressed air, if you get one out, you're going to have a challenge of getting the second one. You might have to push it kind of halfway in and get the second one out. There's a little trick to it. Careful, you'll shoot them across the garage. If they get stuck with compressed air, you can try to blow them out with grease. And I have seen that work, so that's the next step. But if you do get grease in there, you have to get it all out before you put fresh brake fluid in it, or it will destroy your brake job. It'll eat all your rubber bits. So make sure when you blow these out with grease, if you have to remove your pistons using grease, then you need to remove it 100%. If you do it with compressed air, no need to worry. Just kind of wipe it out like you normally do. Anyway, onward. Why I came up here first was to show you guys that you should take this off and kind of monitor the pushback scenario from the brake fluid when you push your pistons in. So of course mine dribbled all over the place, but that's another thing that you really want to pay attention to. Brake clean will destroy paint. So this little guy fell out upon removal. I know it's a retainer for the brake pads and I know where it goes. I just don't know which direction it goes. So you can see it's not entirely symmetrical. So when in doubt, service manual. So we're looking at chapter 13 here, the hydraulic brakes. And what we have is this top icon in the left here. And you can see that piece in the top right of your viewfinder right now. And the tab is pointed towards the pistons. So that's the way it's going back together. So I think it's pretty obvious, but try not to touch pad material. I was just looking at the quality of these, look decent. I mean, there's a lot of copper content in the pad, a lot of sintered copper, which is always good, I think. So they might wear out fast because they're soft, but you don't need to kill those Allen keys. They've got caps to back them up for a reason. Just make sure you never seize them at the ends where they come through the caliper on both sides. Just use enough of that silver paste to get it all over your camera. Remember, this came out hard, so I'm making sure it's on there when it goes back in. This is the stuff I was talking about, Silk Glide brake lubricant. We applied Never Seize to this side and to this side where it's threaded. But now on this pin, we're going to use Silk Glide on both of those pins. If you've been using Never Seize on these slides, you got to clean out the Never Seize before you jam some silicone brake lubricant in there. Just do the best you can. Alright, she's all back together. Before you mount it on the bike, you want to make sure that this thing still slides. It's really hard to show you with one hand, and I'm not going to bother. The other thing is you want to make sure your boots aren't all blown out and that everything's good there. As promised, liberal application. Might as well. So there you have it. All cleaned up, back on. New brake pads. Everything's greased and serviced. Wheel spins freely, brake works. Tomorrow I'll take it out and try to seat these pads to this rotor. This is one of those things, the rotors are getting pretty hard to find, so I gotta use what I got. Luckily it doesn't feel trashed or anything, so I'm gonna keep going with it. Alright, well that's it for this video. That's pretty much a brake pad replacement in the front on an ATC250r. Everything feels good. We lubed up all our hardware, so another 10 years from now it'll come out. This is a good time if you were going to do a complete brake job. You would probably want to change the fluid now. I pushed mine back to the reservoir, I looked at it, it looked alright, and I think I'm going to just run it. See how these fork seals work, and if it's going to leak out on me, then I'm not out too much. Alright guys, we'll see you on the next 250R video. Hey, please check my channel for all content. I've got some other 250R videos, and then I have a remote control lawnmower project going right now that I've been sharing. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I appreciate the support. Thanks guys. I'm out.